My name is Samantha Whitaker, and I was 19 years old when the person who should have protected me most locked me in a basement in Atlanta, Georgia, to force me to surrender a $5 million condo that my grandmother had placed in my name. She wanted it handed over to my stepbrother Ethan as if my life and my future were bargaining chips at a family casino. That night was supposed to be nothing more than a glittering party, the kind of southern spectacle where chandeliers sparkled and guests arrived in gowns and tuxedos. But instead, it became the night I learned that blood can be colder than strangers and that family can be the hand that pushes you into the dark. The party was held in Buckhead inside a mansion that belonged to one of my mother's closest social friends. I still remember the way the marble floors glistened as if they had been polished just for the occasion. Waiters moved through the crowd with silver trays. Laughter echoed in every corner. People spoke of real estate deals of summer homes in Hilton Head of private schools their children attended. From the outside, it was the portrait of wealth and stability. Inside my chest, however, there was a storm that had been building for years. My mother, Linda Dawson, stood near the center of the ballroom that night, her sequined dress catching the light. Her lips curved into the kind of smile that looked sweet but hid blades behind it. By her side was Ethan Dawson, my 23-year-old stepbrother who had grown up being told he was the sun around which the rest of us revolved. Guests congratulated him as if he had accomplished something spectacular, but I knew the truth. He had dropped out of college in Orlando, burned through money, and still my mother shielded him. To her, Ethan was always the chosen one, and I was the afterthought. I had tried to tell myself that night would pass with polite small talk, with forced smiles, with me slipping out early before the tension could thicken, but I was wrong. When the string quartet paused and the murmur of voices dipped, my mother tapped a spoon against her glass. The sound cut through the chatter like a warning bell. I froze because I knew that tone. I had lived beneath it for more than a decade. With a voice dripping with false pride, she announced to 50 guests that I, her younger daughter, would be presenting Ethan with the deed and keys to my $5 million condo in Miami Brickell as his birthday gift. Applause rippled through the crowd. Gasps of admiration followed. People clapped as if generosity had been my choice. In that moment, my heart pounded so loudly I could hear nothing else. My legs felt weak, my skin prickled with shame. My condo, the one my grandmother had entrusted to me, the one sanctuary I had, was being stripped away with a sentence. The humiliation seared deeper than any flame. I glanced at Ethan. He gasped with mock surprise, placing a hand to his chest as though he were shocked, but I saw it, the flicker of triumph in his eyes. He knew. He had known all along. This was orchestrated. My mother's smile widened as she looked at me, daring me to comply, daring me to nod and hand over my dignity. I could feel the weight of 50 pairs of eyes pressing against me. Whispers rose. How generous. What a gift. Poor Samantha will learn sacrifice. My throat burned, but a force inside me surged. I forced the word out. No. It sliced through the air sharper than any glass shattering. The room stilled. People leaned forward as if they had misheard. Did she say no? My stepbrother's smile faltered, but quickly shifted back into his mask of sorrowful disappointment. My mother's eyes narrowed. What did you say? Her voice was not loud, but it carried the tone of warning that had once sent me outside into storms and punished me into silence. I straightened my back, though my legs trembled. I said no. This condo is mine. My grandmother gave it to me, and I will not hand it over. For a moment, silence stretched. Olivia's name was not here. There was no other sibling to deflect the cruelty onto. There was only me and Ethan and my mother. The mask cracked. My mother's face darkened. Guests whispered. Some raised their phones higher. I felt the sting of judgment, selfish girl, ungrateful child, and yet I held my ground. That was when her hand came. It swung fast across my cheek. The crack echoed through the ballroom. Gasps followed. I staggered back. Pain burst through my face, hot and sharp, but what cut deeper was the laughter disguised as coughs and the whispers disguised as pity. Ethan stepped forward, then shoved me toward the side door as though I were nothing but a nuisance to be removed. My heels scraped against the marble as he pushed harder. My mother followed close behind. In seconds, the brightness of the ballroom gave way to the dim, cold corridor of the mansion. My voice caught in my throat, but no one stopped them. Not one guest intervened. I heard the music resume faintly behind me as if nothing had happened. They pulled me along until we reached the basement stairs. The smell of damp concrete hit my nose. The light flickered. Fear twisted my stomach, but anger was stronger. I struggled, but Ethan was larger. With one final shove, they pushed me down the steps. I stumbled and landed hard against the floor. The door slammed above me. A lock clicked. Darkness wrapped around me like chains. I pressed my hand to my burning cheek and whispered into the void that I would not break. For the first time, I was not the obedient daughter. I was something else. Someone who had finally said no. And in that basement, trembling but unbroken, I realized the night was only beginning. Have you ever felt trapped by your own family? Comment yes if you know the sting. When people look at my story, they often ask how it could reach the point where a mother would lock her daughter in a basement to hand property to a son. The truth is, it did not begin in a single night of cruelty. It was written in years of small humiliations that gathered like rain until they became a flood. I was born in Savannah, Georgia, a city of moss-draped oaks and cobblestone streets where neighbors waved and thought they knew who we were. My father died when I was 7 years old. I still remember the sound of church bells the day of his funeral and the way my mother held my hand too tightly as if clenching it could erase the truth. His absence left a silence in the house that never left me. Within a year, my mother remarried. His name was Richard Dawson, a wealthy car dealer who owned showrooms across Georgia. To outsiders, he was charming, broad-shouldered, the kind of man who shook hands with confidence and spoke about success as if it were his birthright. To me, he was distant, a presence that filled the home without ever making room for me. Along with him came Ethan Dawson, his son from a previous marriage. Ethan was 4 years older than me. From the moment he walked through the door, he was treated as a prince. He received gifts, trips a room decorated with new furniture while I was told to be grateful for what I had. The contrast was like a knife. When I was 10 years old, I accidentally knocked over a glass of orange juice in the kitchen. The spill spread across the floor, dripping into the cracks of the tile. My mother's face hardened. Without a word, she opened the back door and ordered me outside. It was raining, the kind of steady Georgia downpour that soaked through clothes in seconds. I stood on the porch, shivering in my little dress, the water dripping down my hair, while behind me I heard laughter. Richard had handed Ethan a slice of cake, praising him for being careful, for being the good child. My teeth chattered, but the cold in my chest cut deeper than the rain. That was the first time I understood that in this house my mistakes were magnified while Ethan's failures were polished into excuses. As the years passed, the pattern deepened. Ethan was enrolled in private school while I remained in public. He was given a bicycle with shining chrome handlebars while I rode an old second-hand one that squeaked with every turn. At family gatherings, my mother bragged about his grades even when they were average, while my straight-A report cards were dismissed with a nod. When I turned 14, I brought home a report card with an A- in math. It was the best grade in the class, but when my mother saw it, her lips tightened. She told me that perfection was the only acceptable goal. That night, Richard pulled a leather belt from his closet. He did not strike me hard enough to leave scars, but the sting across my back taught me a different lesson. The lesson was that love in this house was conditional and always weighed against Ethan's comfort. The injustice was not hidden. Ethan saw it too. He smirked when I was punished, knowing that my pain confirmed his throne. At school, I tried to pretend I was normal. I joined clubs, I studied late into the night. I tried to build a world where I was more than the shadow of a golden child. But every time I returned home, the weight of being lesser pressed on me. My mother whispered phrases that sounded like advice but were chains in disguise. You are the younger one, Samantha, you must yield. Families survive when someone sacrifices. For years, I believed her. I thought maybe if I yielded enough, if I sacrificed enough, she would finally look at me with the pride she gave Ethan so freely. But that moment never came. By the time I reached high school, the divide in our family was no longer subtle. Ethan was celebrated like a rising star, even though his achievements were small. When he played one season of basketball before quitting, my mother cheered as if he had been scouted by the NBA. When I won first place in a regional essay contest, she barely glanced at the certificate before telling me to set the table for dinner. The message was clear. Ethan's breath was worthy of applause. My hard work was background noise. The older I became, the more I noticed the cruelty beneath the surface. At birthdays, Ethan's gifts came wrapped in ribbons with the latest gadgets inside. Mine were practical clothes I needed, or sometimes nothing at all because I was told money was tight. Yet Richard bought Ethan a car for his 16th birthday, a shiny black Mustang that gleamed in the driveway. I stood barefoot on the concrete that day, clapping on command, but inside I swore I would never depend on them for anything. I would earn my own way, even if it meant crawling through broken glass to do it. School became my escape. While Ethan partied with friends and slept until noon, I studied late into the night with a lamp that flickered in my room. I learned to code on an outdated laptop. I took extra credit assignments. I built myself piece by piece out of discipline because love was not something I could rely on. But even my successes were turned into weapons against me. When I earned perfect scores, my mother said grades were fine, but could I try to be softer, warmer, more like Ethan? The more I accomplished, the less they acknowledged. It was as if my ambition was a flaw instead of a gift. The tension grew worse after Ethan went off to college in Orlando. Within a year, he had dropped classes, failed exams, and racked up credit card debt. Instead of facing consequences, he returned home to praise. My mother excused every mistake. She said he was just finding his path. Meanwhile, she pressured me to cover small expenses around the house, telling me that families share burdens. What she meant was that I should quietly clean up behind Ethan without asking questions. Sometimes I lay awake at night, staring at the ceiling of my room in Savannah, hearing the faint sounds of the city outside, wondering if I would ever belong in my own home. I dreamed of escape, but the chains of loyalty pulled tight. I still craved her approval. I still wanted to hear one word of pride, but it never came. By 17, I had stopped hoping. I shifted my focus to survival. Scholarships, part-time jobs, anything that could build a wall between me and their control. That was when my grandmother Margaret stepped in. She had always lived in Charleston, a few hours away, in a stately old house with white columns and gardens that smelled of magnolia in summer. She had watched the family from a distance, but she was no fool. She saw the way my mother diminished me. She saw the way Ethan was coddled into uselessness. One afternoon, she called me to her home. I still remember walking into her study, the air heavy with the scent of leather books and old wood, her eyes sharp and unwavering. She placed a folder on the desk and slid it toward me. Inside were documents. "This condo in Miami is now in your name. Samantha," she said. "It is not a gift to be stolen. It is your shield. Guard it." In that moment, something shifted in me. I felt the weight of her trust press into my hands. For the first time in my life, someone in my bloodline had chosen me, had recognized me not as a shadow, but as someone worth protecting. I promised her I would guard it, though at 17 I did not fully understand the war it would ignite. What I did understand was that I was not invisible. Not entirely. Margaret had seen me. That was enough to keep me going, even as the storm in my own house grew louder. I was 17 the first time I walked into the Miami condo that my grandmother Margaret had secured in my name. The drive from Charleston to Miami had taken nearly 10 hours, but the moment the valet opened the glass doors and the ocean breeze slipped through, I felt as if I had crossed a border into another life. The building towered over Brickell, its windows shimmering in the Florida sun. Inside the lobby, marble stretched from wall to wall, fountains whispered, and a grand chandelier glowed like captured starlight. For a girl who had been told all her life that she was less, stepping into that space was like being given a glimpse of freedom. Margaret stood beside me, her cane tapping lightly against the floor, her expression firm but proud. She told me this place was not just a property, but a statement. It said that my future was not tied to my mother's control or my stepfather's wealth. It said that I had been seen and chosen. When we opened the door to the unit itself, my breath caught. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed the expanse of Biscayne Bay, sunlight bouncing off the water like diamonds. The rooms smelled of fresh paint and polished wood. It was modern, sleek, everything a young woman could dream of. Margaret handed me the keys and said words I will never forget. "This condo is your shield, Samantha. One day they will try to take it from you. Guard it with everything you have." I nodded, though at the time I could not imagine how quickly her warning would prove true. In those walls, I felt a sense of safety I had never known. I walked barefoot across the cool tiles, opened the balcony doors, and let the wind wash over me. For once, the world seemed larger than my mother's voice, larger than Ethan's shadow. For once, I felt I belonged somewhere. Margaret explained the details to me carefully. The deed was in my name. The trust she had established protected it legally until I turned 21. No transfer could happen without my signature. It was airtight, or so we believed. That night, we sat together at the small dining table inside the condo. She brewed tea, the steam curling between us. Her voice softened. "Samantha, you must understand your mother will never see this as yours. To her, everything you hold is meant for Ethan. You cannot bend to her will. If you do, she will consume you piece by piece until nothing remains." I listened, the weight of her words settling heavy on my chest. I had spent years yearning for my mother's approval, and here was my grandmother telling me that yearning would destroy me. It hurt to hear, but deep down, I knew it was true. I promised Margaret I would fight, though inside, I feared what that fight would cost. After we returned to Charleston, the condo became more than just a piece of real estate. It became a symbol, a lighthouse on the horizon of my future. I would look at the photographs I had taken of the balcony view, the wide expanse of water stretching endlessly, and I would remind myself that there was a world beyond the Dawson house, beyond the suffocating walls of my mother's judgment. Margaret called often, her voice steady, even when age weighed heavy on her body. She asked about my studies, my health, my dreams. She was the only adult who cared about those answers. My mother never asked. Ethan never cared. They saw me as an obstacle, an inconvenient reminder that not all power could be bent to their will. The contrast sharpened when my grandmother visited Atlanta. During one dinner, she told Richard that she was proud of me for winning a state science award. I remember the way his eyes narrowed, how my mother shifted uncomfortably, how Ethan rolled his eyes and muttered that no one cared about nerd awards. Margaret did not flinch. She looked directly at him and said, "Ethan, you will learn that brains outlast charm and money." The table fell silent. It was the only time I had ever seen him speechless. That moment gave me strength, but it also drew the lines deeper between us. The more Margaret stood by me, the more my mother seethed. I could see it in her smile that stretched too tight, in her voice that dripped with honey but burned with acid. "Samantha is still young," she would say. "She does not know what it means to manage responsibility. Ethan is older, he knows what to do with opportunity." Margaret's gaze would harden her cane, tapping the floor, and she would reply that responsibility is proven by action, not age. My mother's cheeks flushed, but she said nothing. I understood then that my grandmother had not just given me property. She had given me protection, a shield against voices that had long defined me as less. Still, I knew that shield would be tested. When I visited the condo alone during breaks, I felt both free and terrified. I would study late at night on the balcony, the city lights sparkling like a million tiny promises. I would cook simple meals in the kitchen and hum to myself, reveling in the quiet. Yet sometimes I would stand in the living room and imagine my mother bursting through the door, her voice commanding, her eyes demanding. The fear never left me. One evening, as I packed my bag to return to Atlanta for school, I found a note Margaret had slipped into my drawer. It read, "They will circle you like vultures, but remember, Samantha, the condo is not just walls and windows. It is proof that you are seen, that you matter. Keep your back straight." Those words became my mantra. Every time Ethan flaunted his new car, every time my mother criticized me for being too quiet or too serious, I whispered them silently. Proof that I am seen. Proof that I matter. I did not know when the storm would break, but I knew it was coming. And when it did, I would need every ounce of strength that Margaret had given me. The first cracks began to show during my freshman year at the University of Miami. I had barely settled into my classes when my mother started calling more frequently. At first, the conversations seemed harmless. She asked about my courses, whether I was eating well, whether I had enough money. But underneath her words, there was always a hint of calculation. Each question ended with a subtle reminder of Ethan's struggles. He had just failed another semester in Orlando. He had racked up credit card debt from nights spent in clubs. He was falling behind, she said, and family must help family. The message was clear. Help meant sacrifice, and sacrifice meant me. When I visited Atlanta for Thanksgiving, the air in the Buckhead house felt heavier than ever. Richard sat at the head of the table, his phone buzzing with messages from his dealership, while my mother hovered over Ethan like a queen protecting her heir. The dinner spread gleamed under the chandelier, but no one spoke of gratitude. Instead, the conversation circled again and again toward Ethan's future. He deserved another chance at college. He needed stability. He needed space to build himself up. And then the quiet implication he needed the condo. My fork froze halfway to my mouth. Margaret's warning echoed in my mind. I set it down carefully, but my silence was taken as weakness. My mother's voice sliced through the room. "Samantha, you are wasting that place. You only use it for weekends and breaks. Ethan could make it his home. That is what a good sister would do." I stared at my plate, fighting the urge to shout. The pressure grew more public with each passing month. At a Christmas gathering, my mother raised to toast her glass of champagne, catching the light. To Ethan, she said sweetly, the future leader of this family. May he have all he needs to succeed. Guests clapped politely, but then her voice turned. And to Samantha, who holds more than she knows what to do with. My cheeks burned as laughter rippled around the table. Ethan smirked, raising his glass like a king humoring a servant. I wanted to shrink into the floor. Later that night, I locked myself in the guest room and stared at the ceiling, my chest aching with humiliation. I could not escape the truth. My mother was grooming the entire family to see my condo as Ethan's birthright. The pressure was not only emotional, but financial. I discovered Ethan had borrowed money from Richard's business accounts. When Richard confronted him, my mother intervened, insisting it was temporary, that Ethan only needed time. Then she turned to me with cold precision. "If you cared about this family, you would step up. That condo is an unnecessary luxury. Ethan needs it more than you ever will." Her words lodged in my chest like shards. Every conversation, every family meal became a stage where I was cast as selfish for holding on to what was mine. I began dreading the sound of my phone, the sight of my mother's name flashing on the screen. Each call felt like a tightening noose. By spring, the pressure turned into open humiliation. My mother began speaking about the condo in front of her friends during luncheons at the Buckhead mansion. I overheard one of them say, "Linda, it is such a waste for a 19-year-old to hold property like that. Ethan could finally settle if he had it." My mother smiled thinly and replied, "We are working on convincing her. She is stubborn, but she will come around." Their laughter followed me as I carried empty dishes back to the kitchen, every word slicing into me like proof that I was just a pawn in their plans. Ethan grew bolder too. When I visited Atlanta one weekend, he cornered me in the driveway beside his brand new car, a silver convertible Richard had co-signed for despite his debts. He leaned against the hood, his grin smug. "You know the condo is mine eventually. Mom and Dad already said so." "Why drag it out?" I clutched my backpack tighter, my throat dry, but I managed to say, "It is not yours, Ethan. It is mine." His smile faded into a sneer. "Then you had better be ready to fight for it." Those words haunted me for weeks. Even Margaret noticed the shift. During one visit, she asked me gently if the pressure was worsening. I wanted to hide it, not to worry her, but she saw through my silence. She placed her wrinkled hand over mine and said, "They will not win as long as you remember this place is yours by right, not by permission." Her strength steadied me, yet deep inside I feared she was overestimating my courage. The final blow before everything erupted came during Ethan's pre-birthday dinner in Miami. We sat in a private dining room overlooking the bay, the air heavy with the scent of grilled seafood and wine. My mother raised her glass once again, smiling as though the world belonged to her. Tonight, we celebrate Ethan not just for his birthday, but for his bright future, and tomorrow he will receive a gift that will change his life. My stomach dropped. Guests turned expectantly toward me, their eyes narrowing with curiosity. I felt the trap closing. My mother's gaze pinned me like a knife. Samantha knows what I mean. The room buzzed with whispers, phones lifted subtly, faces hungry for spectacle. I forced a small smile, but my heart thundered in panic. That night when I returned to the condo, I stood on the balcony, the ocean spread before me, the city glowing below. Margaret's words echoed, "This condo is your shield! Guard it!" But I also heard Ethan's threat. "You had better be ready to fight." The pressure had reached a boiling point. I knew the storm would break soon, and when it did, I would have to choose between silence and survival. I had no idea that the breaking point was only days away and that it would come with violence I could never have imagined. The night of Ethan's 23rd birthday began with the glow of chandeliers and the murmur of polite laughter inside the Ritz-Carlton ballroom in Miami Beach. The air smelled of roses and champagne. Waiters moved like shadows carrying silver trays. Guests in glittering gowns and tailored suits filled the room, their conversations humming like bees around a hive. I wore a pale blue dress, one of the few nice things I had saved for special occasions. My palms were damp as I clutched my clutch bag, a sense of dread curling in my stomach. I knew my mother had planned something, but I could not have guessed how far she would go. Ethan basked in the attention at the center of the room. He wore a navy suit too sharp for his careless posture, a glass of whiskey already in his hand. His friends from Orlando circled him, laughing loudly, slapping his back as though he were a king among boys. My mother, Linda, stood nearby, glowing in a sequined gown, her smile wide enough to split glass. She moved from guest to guest with the ease of a politician, whispering, flattering, spinning her story about the Dawson family's success. My stepfather, Richard, lingered close to the bar, his phone glowing in his palm as business messages continued to tether him. The first half of the night unfolded like any other party. Speeches, toasts, laughter. I forced smiles, sipped water, and waited for the inevitable. When the quartet finished their set and the clapping died down, my mother stepped forward. She held a microphone, her sequined dress glittering under the lights. The chatter stilled, the weight of 50 pairs of eyes pressed against me. Her voice rang clear across the ballroom. "Tonight we not only celebrate my son Ethan's birthday, but we celebrate his bright future. And what better way to give him stability than with a home of his own?" She turned toward me, her smile sharp as a blade. "That is why my daughter Samantha will transfer her Miami condo to her brother tonight." Gasps rippled through the room, then applause rose like a crashing wave. My heart slammed against my ribs, heat burned through my cheeks. The words felt like a public execution. Ethan smirked, lifting his glass. "To new beginnings," he shouted. Cameras flashed, phones tilted upward. Guests leaned in their eyes alight with curiosity, waiting for me to bend. But I did not. I felt my knees shake, but I locked them firm. I raised my chin, my voice slicing the silence. "No!" The room froze. My single word cracked against the walls like thunder. Whispers erupted. "Did she say no? Selfish girl. Ungrateful." My mother's smile stiffened. Ethan's grin faltered. Richard lowered his phone, his jaw tightening. I repeated louder, my voice shaking but clear. "No. This condo is mine. It was given to me by my grandmother, and I will not give it to Ethan." The applause died into murmurs. A woman in a red dress covered her mouth. A man near the back muttered that I was spoiled. My mother's face turned dark, her eyes glittering with fury. She hissed into the microphone. "Do not embarrass us, Samantha. Think of the family." Ethan stepped forward, his whiskey breath hot. "Don't make this harder. Just hand it over." I backed away, my heart pounding. Then it came. My mother's hand lashed across my cheek with a sharp crack that echoed louder than the music. Pain exploded across my face. I staggered backward, my clutch slipping to the floor. Gasps filled the room. Someone whispered, "My God, she hit her." Phones clicked faster. Ethan shoved me toward the side door, his grip bruising my arm. Guests watched, stunned, some whispering, others frozen. Not one person stopped them. They dragged me through the service corridor, the music fading behind heavy doors. My heels scraped the tile, my cheek throbbing where my mother had struck me. The hallway smelled of bleach and old carpet. Ethan's grip tightened. My mother's voice seethed low. "You will not humiliate me in front of them. You will sign the papers tonight." Before I could answer, Ethan shoved me through a metal door. I stumbled down a narrow stairwell, the air growing colder. We reached the basement. The smell of mold and damp concrete filled my nose. They shoved me inside the door, slamming shut, the lock snapping into place. Darkness swallowed me whole. I pressed my hand against the wall, my breath ragged. My face burned. My heart raced. The muffled sound of music above mocked me. I realized with a shiver that I was trapped not just in a basement, but in a prison built by my own family. The cold of the basement seeped into my bones as I sank onto the concrete floor. The air was damp heavy with the scent of mold and rust. Pipes clanged somewhere in the distance, each sound magnifying my isolation. My cheek throbbed where my mother had struck me, the sting searing deeper than skin. I pressed my palm against it, feeling the heat, the humiliation. Above me, I could still faintly hear the muffled music and laughter of the ballroom, the celebration continuing as though I had vanished. I tried the door first. It was solid steel, the handle immovable. I shoved my shoulder against it, but it did not budge. Panic surged up my throat. My breath quickened, fogging the dark air. I whispered to myself, "Stay calm, Samantha, stay calm." But the silence answered, pressing down like a weight. I thought of Margaret's warning, her voice echoing, "They will try to take it. Guard it. Guard." And now here I was locked away like contraband while my mother offered my life as tribute to Ethan's failures. My mind spun with memories, being 7 and left in the rain after spilling juice, being 14 and lashed with a belt for a grade that was not perfect. Always punished, always lesser, always invisible unless they needed something. And tonight I had refused, and that refusal had lit their fury into violence. The basement became more than a room. It became a symbol of every time they had silenced me, every time they had shoved me into shadows. I pressed my back to the wall, tears blurring my vision, but then something inside hardened. I would not let them break me here. Not tonight. I searched the room, my hands running over the damp walls, the rough floor. My fingers grazed an old utility sink pipes rattling above it. Beside it lay a crate filled with rags and tools. My pulse quickened. I dug through until I found a rusted nail and a bent piece of wire. My grandmother once told me that fear can paralyze or sharpen. Tonight it sharpened. My hands trembled as I bent the wire, working it into the keyhole. I had seen old movies where characters picked locks with hairpins, and desperation gave me courage to try. Minutes dragged. Sweat dripped down my temple. The wire slipped, scraping my fingers raw. Finally, I heard a faint click. My heart leapt. I turned the handle slowly. The door creaked open into the service corridor, dimly lit by a flickering bulb. I slipped out, clutching my dress at the hem to keep from stumbling. My heels clacked softly against the tile as I crept along the hall. Every sound seemed deafening, every shadow threatening. I followed the corridor until I reached a stairwell. The faint smell of food told me it led to the kitchen. I pushed through, emerging behind swinging doors where chefs shouted orders and pans clattered. A waiter nearly bumped into me, his eyes widening at the sight of my bruised face and torn dress. But before he could speak, I shook my head, whispering, "Please, not now." He froze, then turned away as if sensing the danger. I found a side exit that opened into a narrow alley behind the hotel. The night air hit me cool and salty from the ocean. I leaned against the wall, my chest heaving. My phone had fallen from my clutch during the struggle. Panic threatened again until I remembered. Hannah. My best friend had insisted I memorize her number. I spotted a hotel employee smoking near the dumpsters and begged him for his phone. He hesitated, glancing at my bruised cheek, then silently handed it over. My fingers shook as I dialed. Hannah answered on the second ring. "Samantha." Her voice was sharp with alarm. "Where are you?" I swallowed hard, whispering the basement they locked me in. "I just got out. They tried to make me give Ethan the condo." My mother slapped me in front of everyone. My voice cracked. Hannah's gasp was followed by steel. "Stay there. Do not go back in. I am coming. I am. And record everything if you can. We will not let them bury this." I handed the phone back to the man, murmured thanks, and stumbled toward the streetlights. My body ached. My face throbbed, but a new fire burned in my chest. For the first time, I realized that escape was not enough. They wanted me silent, erased, reduced to nothing but Ethan's stepping stone. But I would not vanish. Not this time. I would walk back into that ballroom not as their victim, but as their defiance. The night air outside the Ritz-Carlton was sharp with the tang of ocean salt, a relief against my burning cheek. I leaned against a lamppost, my hands trembling, the sequins of my torn dress catching the streetlight like broken glass. My heart still pounded from the basement, but beneath the fear was something fiercer. I was done being cornered. I pulled my shoulders back and forced myself to breathe steady. I had escaped, but escape was not enough. If I simply ran home, my mother would rewrite the story. Ethan would spin it as a misunderstanding, and I would be cast as the ungrateful daughter again. I needed proof, undeniable proof, to show the world exactly what had been done. Hannah arrived within minutes. Her little silver Honda screeched to a stop at the curb. She rushed out, her nursing scrubs still wrinkled from her shift, her dark hair tied back in a messy bun. The moment she saw me, she froze, her eyes widening. "Samantha, oh my God!" She grabbed my hands, scanning my bruised cheek, the blood on my lip, the ripped fabric at my shoulder. I choked out, "They locked me in the basement. They tried to force me." Her expression hardened into something I had only ever seen in emergencies. Her phone was already in her hand. "We are recording everything from this moment. If they want war, they will get it." She led me to the back seat of her car, where she had already laid out a first aid kit. With practiced hands, she dabbed antiseptic on my lip, her movements gentle but swift. I winced but kept talking, recounting every detail: the announcement, the slap, the shove, the locked basement. She recorded my voice on her phone, then turned the camera on me. "Say it again," she urged. I hesitated, the lens like an unblinking witness, but then I lifted my chin. "My name is Samantha Whitaker. My mother struck me tonight in front of 50 people because I refused to give my condo to my stepbrother, Ethan Dawson. They dragged me into the basement and locked me inside." My voice shook but grew steadier as the words spilled out. "This is the truth." Hannah's eyes glistened as she lowered the phone. "Perfect. No one can erase this now." She slipped the phone into her pocket, her voice steady. "Do you know what this means, Samantha? You are not just fighting them anymore. You are showing everyone." I nodded, though fear still twisted inside me. The idea of the world watching made my skin prickle, but it also gave me strength. If silence had been my prison, then exposure was my weapon. Hannah wrapped her arm around me, her voice low but fierce. "We are not finished. You are going back in there, but this time you are not walking alone." We sat for a few moments in the car as I steadied my breath. I could still hear the music drifting faintly through the hotel walls, mocking me. The thought of stepping back inside made my stomach knot, but the thought of walking away made me sick. Margaret's voice echoed in my mind. "This condo is your shield. Guard it. If I ran now, they would snatch it away piece by piece." I tightened my fists. No, I would not run. Not this time. Hannah handed me her phone again. "If you collapse, I will hold this high. If they touch you again, the world will see it live." I stared at the glowing screen, my reflection pale but unbroken. I nodded slowly. "Then let's go." We slipped through the side entrance, the muffled beat of music growing louder. Each step down the corridor felt like walking back into a battlefield. My cheek burned, my knees shook, but my spine straightened. Hannah walked close beside me, the phone already rolling. This was no longer just a party. It was about to become evidence. The hallway leading back toward the ballroom seemed longer than before, each step echoing against the marble like a warning. My dress brushed against my legs, torn and stained, a silent testimony to what had already happened. Hannah walked just behind me, her phone raised at chest level, recording everything. The small red light felt like a shield. If my mother or Ethan tried again, they would not only be striking me, they would be striking the eyes of whoever would soon watch. We paused at the heavy double doors. The music swelled faintly through the cracks, mingling with laughter and clinking glasses. Hannah touched my shoulder. "Are you ready?" My throat tightened, but I nodded. "If I do not do this now, they win forever." She squeezed my hand once and whispered, "Then let's burn their stage down with truth." I pushed the doors open. The ballroom lights hit me like a spotlight. Conversation faltered. Heads turned. Gasps rippled as guests took in my torn dress, my bruised cheek, my lips still bloodied. A woman near the cake table covered her mouth. Someone whispered, "She came back." Ethan froze mid-laugh, his whiskey glass dangling from his hand. My mother's smile collapsed into a mask of horror. I walked forward, every step deliberate, though my knees trembled. Hannah moved beside me, her phone steady. I heard murmurs spreading like fire. "Is that blood? Did she fight back? Oh my God!" The quartet's music stuttered to a halt, bows hovering in mid-air. My mother rushed toward me, hissing under her breath. "What are you doing? Stop this madness!" I lifted my chin, my voice sharp enough to slice through the silence. "I am showing them what you did." Hannah shifted so the phone captured my mother's face. The red light blinked like a beacon. My mother recoiled as if struck. Guests craned their necks, phones of their own, rising higher. Ethan stepped forward, his expression twisted with anger. He muttered, "You should have stayed in the basement." The words hung heavy in the air, heard by too many ears to be denied. Gasps erupted, a woman's voice cutting clear. "Did he just say basement?" Cameras clicked faster. My stomach churned, but my resolve hardened. I turned slowly to face the guests, my voice trembling but loud enough to carry. Tonight, my mother tried to force me to give Ethan a $5 million condo that my grandmother left to me. When I refused, she slapped me in front of all of you. Then they dragged me away and locked me in a basement like I was nothing. Silence fell heavy, punctuated only by the faint hum of phones recording. My mother stammered, "Samantha, stop lying," but the crowd no longer believed her polished tone. Whispers turned sharp. Someone muttered, "I saw the slap." Another said, "I heard the door slam when they took her." Ethan lunged toward me, but Hannah stepped between us. Her phone raised higher, her voice like steel. "Touch her again, and the whole world will see it live." He froze, fury flashing in his eyes, but the weight of dozens of cameras held him back. For the first time that night, I felt the tide shift. The silence of years cracked open into the sound of witnesses, of evidence of truth no longer hidden. I stood straighter, bruised but unbroken, and whispered under my breath so only Hannah could hear. "This is just the beginning." The ballroom had transformed into a stage, and I was no longer the quiet daughter hiding in the wings. I stood bruised and bloodied in the center, and every gaze was fixed on me. My mother's sequined gown glittered under the chandeliers, but her face had lost its polish. Ethan's smirk was gone, replaced with the kind of rage that trembles just before it explodes. Richard shifted uneasily near the bar, clearly wishing he could vanish into his phone. The crowd, 50 strong, murmured like a restless sea. Some clutched their champagne glasses tightly, others lifted their phones higher, eager to record history unfolding. My voice trembled, but carried as I said again, "They locked me in the basement." My mother's shriek cut through the room. "Lies!" She whirled toward the guests, her smile desperate, her tone syrupy. "She is unstable. She is dramatic. You know how girls can be." Her words bounced off the walls and fell flat. Too many eyes had seen the slap, too many ears had caught Ethan's damning slip about the basement. The crowd was no longer on her side. Ethan stepped forward, his jaw clenched. He pointed at me like an accuser. "You are ruining everything. Do you think anyone cares about you? You are nothing without us." His voice cracked the arrogance unraveling into desperation. I steadied my breathing, forcing calm into my voice. "No, Ethan. I was nothing with you." The words cut through him, his face blanching. A ripple of gasps followed. At that moment, the heavy double doors swung open again. The sound of a cane striking marble echoed sharply, commanding attention. Heads turned. My grandmother Margaret strode in diamonds at her throat. Silver hair swept back her evening gown, regal despite the late hour. She walked with the authority of someone who had built legacies and buried empires. Her eyes scanned the room like blades narrowing as they landed on me, then shifting to my mother and Ethan. The room held its breath. My grandmother's voice was low but firm. David once told me wealth was power. He was wrong. Truth is power. Her cane struck the floor again, silencing the last of the whispers. She turned to my mother, her words dripping with steel. Linda, explain to me why my granddaughter's face is bruised. Explain to me why guests whisper about basements instead of birthdays. My mother sputtered. Margaret, you misunderstand. She twisted things, But Margaret raised a single hand, and my mother fell silent. Enough. Gasps rippled as Margaret stepped fully into the center of the room, her presence making chandeliers seem to dim. She looked directly at Ethan, her gaze like fire. You stand here dripping arrogance while you live on debts and lies, and you dare to try and take what does not belong to you. Ethan swallowed hard, shifting on his feet, but she did not give him a chance to answer. She pivoted toward the crowd. Tonight, you have all witnessed what this family has become under their control. Cruelty paraded as authority, violence disguised as discipline, greed dressed up as entitlement. She raised her cane and pointed it toward me. And you have seen who has stood despite it. Samantha. My breath caught as dozens of heads turned back to me. My grandmother's words rolled like thunder. She is the only one among them who has earned anything. She is the only one with dignity left in her veins. From this moment forward, everything I own will be hers. Gasps erupted like an explosion. Hands flew to mouths. Someone whispered, did she just disinherit them? Another hissed, she gave it all to Samantha. My mother staggered, her face draining of color. Ethan choked out, you cannot do this. Margaret's cane struck again, sharp as a gavel. I just did. The ballroom vibrated with tension. Phones caught every second the red recording lights like stars burning against the dark. The dynasty my mother and Ethan had tried to build collapsed in real time, and I stood in the center, no longer invisible, no longer silent. My chest heaved, my lip throbbed, but my spine straightened with a strength I had never felt before. This was my moment. The ballroom felt electrified, every breath heavy with tension, every eye glued to the spectacle unfolding. My grandmother's declaration hung in the air like a thunderclap. Disinherited. Everything to Samantha. For a moment, no one moved then, whispers rippled like wildfire. Phones tilted, recording from every angle, hungry to capture the downfall of a dynasty. My mother's sequined gown glittered like shattered glass as she stumbled forward, her voice cracking with panic. Margaret, you cannot mean this. Please, think of appearances. Think of what people will say. My grandmother's eyes blazed. Appearances, what the world will say. Do you not realize, Linda, that the world is already watching? She gestured to the sea of raised phones, the blinking red lights. You struck your own daughter in public. You locked her away like an animal, and you dare to ask me to think of appearances. Ethan's fury broke into the open. He lunged a step toward me, his hand raised, his face twisted with rage. Give me the condo! Give it to me now! He spat the words like venom. The crowd gasped, a woman shrieking, he is going to hit her! But before he could reach me, Margaret's cane slammed against the marble floor with such force that the chandelier above trembled. Touch her again, she thundered, and I will see to it you spend the rest of your life penniless and disgraced. The sound of applause broke out suddenly, hesitant at first, then stronger as guests began clapping. It was not for Ethan, not for my mother, but for Margaret, for the raw justice crackling in her words. Ethan froze mid-stride, his eyes darting to the cameras, capturing every angle of his humiliation. His raised hand trembled, then lowered slowly as the realization struck him. The world would see. I lifted my chin, my voice hoarse but steady. Happy birthday, Ethan. You will never touch what is mine. The crowd gasped again, then the applause grew louder, bolder. For the first time in my life, I was not their scapegoat. I was the storm breaking their carefully built facade. My mother reached for me, her hands shaking, her voice breaking into sobs. "Samantha, please. You are destroying this family. We did everything for you. Do not do this to us." Tears blurred my vision, but they were not for her. They were for the years of silence for the little girl left in the rain, for every moment I had been told I was less. I stepped back, pulling free from her reach. "You destroyed this family when you chose Ethan's comfort over my dignity again and again. You destroyed it when you raised your hand against me tonight." The murmurs rose into shouts. People began speaking openly now, no longer whispers. I saw it. She slapped her. He said, "Basement. This is abuse." Richard tried to step in, his voice strained. "Everyone calm down. This is a misunderstanding." He forced a smile, but it wavered under the weight of dozens of disbelieving stares. One man shouted, "Misunderstanding." "We saw everything." Another called out, "This will be on the news by morning." The illusion collapsed completely. Margaret turned slowly, her gaze sweeping across the guests. "Let it be known," she declared, her voice ringing through the room, "that cruelty wrapped in wealth is still cruelty. Power built on fear is no power at all. My granddaughter will never again be their victim. If you support violence, if you support greed, leave now." Several guests lowered their eyes, shame coloring their cheeks. Some began slipping quietly toward the doors, unwilling to be tied to the spectacle any longer. But others stayed, their phones raised higher, determined to witness every second of the collapse. I stood taller, my bruises burning, but my voice clear. For years, I begged them to see me. Tonight, I do not need their vision. I see myself. My grandmother placed her hand lightly over mine, her eyes softening for the first time that night. "And now the world sees you, too." The crowd erupted in applause, some people even shouting encouragement. A woman near the back called out, "Stay strong, Samantha." Another voice added, "Do not give in." The room that had once judged me as selfish now echoed with support. Ethan stood frozen, his face pale, his jaw clenched as his fiancée slipped the ring off her finger and set it on the nearest table. Gasps followed as she turned and walked out without a word. Ethan's mouth opened, but no sound came. He was gutted before the very audience that had once applauded him. My mother's sobs filled the silence, desperate, broken. But no one comforted her. Not Richard, not Ethan, not a single guest. The empire she had built on appearances had crumbled in the span of an hour, and in its ruins I stood bruised but unbroken, shielded by the woman who had seen me when no one else would. That night, the ballroom was not a celebration of Ethan's birthday. It was a reckoning. It was the moment decades of cruelty cracked open under the weight of truth. And as the cameras recorded, as the applause surged, as my grandmother's cane struck the marble one final time, I knew with certainty that nothing would ever be the same. By the next morning, the party at the Ritz-Carlton was no longer a private scandal whispered among Miami's wealthy. It had become a public storm. Clips of my mother's slap, Ethan's drunken snarl about the basement, and my grandmother's thunderous declaration had spread like wildfire. On TikTok, the hashtag #JusticeForSamantha exploded overnight, racking up millions of views. Twitter trended with phrases like "condos are not gifts" and "basement birthday." Even Facebook, where my mother's social circle used to brag about charity galas, now overflowed with posts condemning her cruelty. I woke up in the condo bruises, throbbing my phone, buzzing endlessly with notifications. At first I was too scared to look, but Hannah insisted. She handed me the phone with a grim smile. "You need to see this." The first clip showed me standing in the ballroom, my dress torn, my lip bloodied, saying the word "no." The caption beneath read, "A daughter refusing to surrender her life." Another video showed Ethan sneering, "You should have stayed in the basement." The comments were brutal. "Who locks their sister in a basement? Disgusting. Arrest them now." And then the most viral clip of all, Margaret striking her cane against the marble and declaring she would rewrite her will. That one had already been played over 10 million times by breakfast. The comments flooded in with praise. A queen protecting her granddaughter. Margaret is the hero we all needed. News outlets picked it up within hours. CNN ran a segment titled "Miami Party Turns Violent Wealthy Family Exposed." Local stations replayed the slap in slow motion, blurring only the blood that followed. The Miami Herald printed a headline across its front page, "Heiress Fights Back." My grandmother's face appeared alongside mine in photos, her expression sharp, mine defiant despite the bruises. Strangers on the street began recognizing me. At the grocery store that afternoon, a woman touched my arm gently and whispered, "Stay strong, sweetheart. We are all with you." The fallout for my family was immediate. Richard's car dealerships in Atlanta lost contracts almost overnight. Clients withdrew, unwilling to be tied to a man whose stepson was trending for assault and whose wife was condemned for violence. Ethan's so-called friends abandoned him, deleting photos of wild nights in Orlando from their feeds. Even his fiancée, who had slipped off her ring during the confrontation, posted a brief statement. "I refuse to be tied to a family built on lies and cruelty." That single line was shared thousands of times, each repost another nail in Ethan's coffin. My mother fared no better. Her charity luncheons in Buckhead evaporated. Women who once sipped champagne in her garden stopped answering her calls. A leaked text showed one of her closest friends saying, "We cannot be associated with her." She slapped her daughter in public. The hypocrisy of her years of boasting about being a perfect mother collapsed in front of the world. She tried issuing a statement through a lawyer claiming the event had been a misunderstanding blown out of proportion. The internet ripped it apart. Memes mocked the phrase "private misunderstanding," pairing it with freeze frames of my bruised cheek. For me, the exposure was a strange mix of vindication and dread. My pain was no longer private, but everywhere. Every time I logged on, I saw my father's hand, raised my mother's fury, Ethan's smirk. At night, I lay awake replaying the moment I was shoved into the basement. But then I would read the comments from strangers. "Stay strong. You are not alone. I survived a toxic family too. Your grandmother is amazing." Those words built me back up when fear threatened to drown me. Protesters even gathered outside one of Richard's Miami offices. They held signs that read, "Protect daughters, not reputations, and no excuse for abuse." The images hit national television, further eroding what little defense my family still tried to build. By the end of the week, Ethan had deleted all his social media. My mother stopped leaving the house. Richard issued a desperate statement blaming stress and misunderstandings, but no one believed him. Their empire was collapsing under the weight of the truth. Meanwhile, Margaret acted with the same precision she had shown in the ballroom. She called her attorneys and ordered amendments to her estate. "Olivia," she said, "is to be removed. Everything to Samantha." Her voice was steady, her eyes fierce. Within days, legal documents confirmed it. The condo was only the beginning. Now, every asset, every investment, every property was being secured in my name. Ethan raged when he heard. He sent furious emails, but the restraining order we had begun filing made those messages dangerous for him, not me. My mother begged through intermediaries, but Margaret ignored her completely. As the weeks passed, the story refused to fade. News anchors debated whether my mother and Ethan should face charges. Advocates for domestic violence survivors praised the visibility of the case, saying it shone a light on the abuse hidden inside wealthy homes. My name became a symbol, my face appearing on talk shows, though I rarely accepted interviews. I did not want fame. I wanted peace. Yet I also understood that silence would let them twist the story. So with Hannah's help, I recorded a video from my condo balcony. My voice was calm but firm. "I will not apologize for protecting myself. I will not surrender what is mine. Family does not mean control. Blood does not mean loyalty." That video reached millions, but exposure was not enough. Justice needed to be official. Margaret reminded me of that one evening as we sat together drinking tea. She tapped her cane lightly and said, "They will try to paint this as drama. We will make it law." And so the path toward the courthouse began. For Ethan and my mother, the fallout was public humiliation. For me, it was a strange rebirth. Strangers sent messages of support, women older than me writing that they had stayed silent for decades and that my story gave them courage. I received invitations to speak at small conferences about resilience. At first, I resisted, but then I remembered the girl I had been at 7 years old, left in the rain for spilling juice. I wanted her to hear a voice that said survival was possible. I wanted others to hear it too. The viral clips that haunted me also freed me. They had stripped away the mask my family wore. They had turned their private cruelty into a public reckoning. And as Miami's skyline glowed outside my window each night, I realized the truth. They had tried to bury me in a basement. Instead, they had built me a platform. The viral storm had shifted public opinion, but Margaret was right. Exposure was not enough. If my mother and Ethan were left unchecked, they would spin the story into something else and claw back whatever power they could. We needed the law. So only days after the party, we sat in the Miami-Dade County Courthouse, the marble floors echoing under my heels, my stomach twisting with dread and determination. Beside me, Hannah clutched her notebook ready to testify, while Margaret stood regal despite her age, her cane clicking with every step. Our attorney, Carla Jimenez, moved like a blade through the chaos of reporters crowding the courthouse steps. Cameras flashed microphones shoved forward. Questions volleyed in rapid fire. Samantha, did your mother really lock you in a basement? Do you plan to cut ties with your family entirely? I kept my eyes forward, my bruises fading, but still visible, a silent reminder of what had been done. Inside the courtroom, the air was thick with anticipation. The case had drawn more attention than anyone expected. The gallery was packed, journalists, activists, even curious citizens who wanted to see the girl from the videos. When the bailiff called for order, my mother entered first, her face pale under layers of makeup, her sequined dress replaced by a conservative suit. Ethan followed, his swagger diminished, his eyes darting nervously. Richard came too, though he tried to remain on the periphery, muttering to his lawyer. For once, they did not command the room. They looked small, cornered animals trapped by the very spectacle they had created. Judge Alvarez presided, a stern woman with sharp glasses and a reputation for no-nonsense rulings. She glanced over the room, her voice steady. This court will hear the matter of Samantha Whitaker versus Linda Dawson and Ethan Dawson. The words struck like a gavel to my heart. It was official. No more whispers, no more manipulation. Carla began with opening remarks. She painted the picture clearly: a 19-year-old pressured for months to sign away a $5 million condo culminating in public assault and unlawful confinement. She held up Hannah's recordings, the clips of the ballroom confrontation, Ethan's own words about the basement. Every sentence landed like a stone in water rippling through the gallery. Then came the testimony. I was first. My hands trembled as I took the stand, swearing to tell the truth. The courtroom was silent as I described the years of favoritism, the slap, the dragging, the basement door slamming shut. At one point, my voice broke, but I forced myself to continue, the image of Margaret's steady gaze keeping me upright. Carla played the viral clip where Ethan sneered, "You should have stayed in the basement." Gasps erupted, the sound of keyboards clattering as reporters typed furiously. The judge raised her hand for silence, but even she looked shaken. Next came Hannah. Calm, precise, her nursing training evident in her composure. She recounted receiving my panicked call, arriving to find me bruised, recording my first statement. She played the video of me in her car, my voice trembling but clear as I said, "My name is Samantha Whitaker. My mother struck me tonight. They locked me in a basement." Watching it on the courtroom screen made my stomach twist, but it also filled me with pride. That girl had been terrified, but she had spoken anyway. Finally, Margaret testified. She did not waste words. She told the court about years of watching my mother favor Ethan, about protecting me with the condo, about her fury upon hearing I had been struck and imprisoned. Her cane tapped once against the floor as she finished. "I will not stand by while greed destroys another generation. My granddaughter deserves protection. The Dawsons deserve consequences." The defense scrambled. My mother's lawyer argued it had been a family misunderstanding, that emotions had run high, that no one was truly in danger. But Carla countered with recordings, photographs of my bruises, eyewitness statements from party guests who had already sworn affidavits. Ethan tried to speak on his own behalf, claiming I was exaggerating, but under cross-examination he admitted to saying the basement line. The gallery erupted again. His credibility shattered in real time. After hours of testimony and evidence, the judge leaned forward, her voice cold as steel. This court finds that Samantha Whitaker was subjected to domestic violence, unlawful confinement, and coercion. Effective immediately, a restraining order is granted against Linda Dawson and Ethan Dawson. Neither may contact or approach Ms. Whitaker within 500 feet. My breath caught. Relief washed over me like a tide. But the ruling did not end there. Judge Alvarez continued. Furthermore, the court acknowledges the legitimacy of the property transfer from Margaret Whitaker to Samantha Whitaker. Any attempt to challenge this inheritance under coercion will be considered fraud. My mother gasped, her hand flying to her chest. Ethan cursed under his breath, his lawyer pulling at his sleeve. The gavel struck, sealing the decision. The gallery broke into murmurs. Reporters' scribbled cameras clicked. Hannah squeezed my hand, tears in her eyes. Margaret simply nodded, her face unreadable, but her grip on her cane steady. The battle that had defined my life was over in the eyes of the law. Outside the courthouse, the scene was chaos. Protesters cheered as I emerged, chanting my name. Reporters shouted questions, but I only said one line before leaving. I spoke because silence was killing me. No one should be locked away for saying no. That clip led the evening news my words replayed across networks nationwide. For my mother and Ethan, the fallout was devastating. Ethan's credit lines were frozen. His gambling debts exposed his reputation, destroyed. My mother retreated into isolation, shunned by her friends, whispered about in every circle she once dominated. Richard quietly sold 2 dealerships to cover losses, his empire crumbling. For me, the ruling was more than legal. It was freedom. I could breathe without fear of footsteps behind me, without waiting for the phone to buzz with threats disguised as family love. That night, back in my condo, I stood on the balcony as the city pulsed with lights below. Hannah leaned against the railing beside me, Margaret resting in a chair behind us. The air smelled of salt and rain, the ocean dark but alive. I touched the railing, the steel cool under my palm. For years, I had feared they would take this from me. Now I knew it would always be mine. Not just the property, but the choice. The right to say no. The right to survive. In the weeks after the courtroom ruling, my life felt both foreign and familiar, as though I had stepped into a new chapter while still carrying the weight of every old page. The bruises on my cheek faded, but the memory of that night stayed sharp, replaying in flashes when I least expected it. Sometimes I would hear the echo of the basement door slamming shut when I closed a cabinet. Sometimes I would wake sweating, my heart pounding, convinced I was still locked below the Ritz-Carlton ballroom. Yet each morning I opened the balcony doors of my condo and let the Miami breeze wash over me. I reminded myself I was free. School became my anchor. I threw myself into psychology classes at the University of Miami, drawn to the idea of understanding how trauma shapes people, how patterns of cruelty repeat, and how healing can begin. My professors were kind, some of them even aware of the case from the news. One of them pulled me aside after class and said softly, "You have survived something many never escape. Do not underestimate the strength it takes to still sit here." I carried those words with me, letting them patch the cracks inside me one at a time. Hannah remained my constant. We studied together late at night, her laughter pulling me back when my thoughts spiraled. Sometimes she would scroll through the supportive messages I received online, reading them aloud until I smiled. Survivors from across the country reached out, women who had endured controlling parents, men who had been silenced by toxic households. They told me my defiance gave them courage to speak. It humbled me and frightened me all at once. My private pain had become a public symbol. But gradually, I learned to accept that my story could be both mine and theirs, a shared torch in the darkness. Margaret became my fortress. She moved into a smaller apartment in Brickell to be closer, though she often said it was so. She could keep an eye on those vultures circling. Her wit remained sharp, but I also noticed how she tired more easily, how her cane bore more of her weight. Some evenings we sat together on my balcony sipping tea, the city humming below us. She would look out at the skyline and murmur, "They tried to bury you, Samantha, but you grew roots instead." I would squeeze her hand, grateful for every moment we still had. Meanwhile, the Dawsons unraveled. Ethan checked into rehab after a video leaked of him drunk in a parking lot shouting about losing his condo. His debts swallowed what little he had left, and the fiancée who had abandoned him at the ballroom never looked back. My mother retreated into silence. Word spread that she no longer hosted luncheons, that friends stopped answering her calls, that she was seen wandering grocery aisles alone, her makeup heavy but her eyes hollow. Richard sold more dealerships and disappeared into business trips no one cared to track. For years, they had seemed invincible, untouchable. Now, they were the cautionary tale whispered about at gatherings, proof that cruelty has consequences. For me, healing was slower layered. Some nights I could laugh with Hannah until tears streamed down my cheeks. Other nights I would cry quietly into my pillow, mourning the mother I had once begged to love me. Therapy helped. My counselor taught me to name the abuse, to strip it of the disguise my mother had wrapped it in. Control is not love, she repeated. Punishment is not care. Each session felt like peeling away a mask I had worn too long. I also found purpose beyond myself. I began volunteering at a domestic violence shelter near campus. At first, I simply organized donations and cleaned, but gradually I was asked to speak with younger women who had fled toxic homes. They looked at me with wide eyes, some recognizing me from the viral clips. I told them what I wished someone had told me at 7, at 14, at 19. You are not invisible. You are not less. You are worth more than their control. Saying the words out loud stitched something inside me that I had thought was broken forever. The condo became more than property. It was sanctuary. I decorated it slowly, not with extravagance, but with intention. A worn bookshelf filled with psychology texts. A framed photo of Hannah and me at the beach, sunburned but smiling. A quilt Margaret gave me, stitched by her own mother decades earlier. These were not just objects, but anchors, proof that I had built a life separate from the Dawson's shadow. Sometimes, though, the ache returned. When I passed mothers and daughters laughing in cafes, a hollow pang cut through me. When I saw fathers teaching their kids to ride bikes, I thought of the one I had lost too soon, the one who might have shielded me if he had lived. Healing did not erase the scars, but it taught me to carry them with pride. They were not marks of shame, but evidence of survival. One evening, months after the courtroom verdict, I stood on the balcony alone. The Miami skyline glittered, the ocean whispering beyond. I closed my eyes and breathed deeply. In that silence, I felt the weight of the past and the lightness of the future. My mother's voice no longer dictated who I was. Ethan's entitlement no longer defined what I deserved. For the first time, my life was truly mine. As the wind lifted my hair and the city pulsed below, I whispered to the night I chose myself. And in the stillness that followed, I realized that choice was the greatest inheritance Margaret could ever have given me. When I look back now, the sharpest truth is not that my mother hit me in front of 50 witnesses, or that Ethan sneered about locking me in a basement, or even that the world watched as my grandmother disinherited them in a single thunderous speech. The sharpest truth is simpler family does not always mean love. For years, I clung to the idea that blood was sacred, that if I tried harder, obeyed more, or sacrificed everything, I might finally earn the warmth I craved. But blood alone cannot build safety. Only love and respect can. The Dawsons taught me what loyalty without compassion becomes control. They used the word family like a chain, binding me to obligations that benefited only Ethan. They demanded obedience while giving nothing in return. For too long, I accepted their definition, believing that being a good daughter meant being silent, being a good sister meant surrendering, being a good woman meant shrinking. That belief nearly destroyed me. But that night in the ballroom taught me a different lesson. Dignity is not given, it is claimed. And when I said no, when I refused to surrender the condo, when I stood bruised and humiliated yet unbroken, I discovered something my mother and Ethan never understood. Real power does not come from taking, but from enduring. Real inheritance is not property or wealth, but the courage to draw boundaries. The fallout made these lessons even clearer. I watched as their empire of appearances crumbled. My mother's friends vanished. Ethan's debts surfaced, Richard's business withered. They had spent years building their lives on control and greed, and when truth tore through, nothing remained. For a while, I pitied them. I thought of my mother sitting alone in her big house, stripped of the admiration she once fed on, and I felt a pang of sorrow. But healing showed me that pity is not the same as forgiveness. Forgiveness is a gift, and she never earned it. Pity is only recognition that cruelty leaves even the cruel hollow in the end. I also learned that silence protects no one. If Hannah had not recorded me in her car, if I had not walked back into that ballroom, if Margaret had not raised her cane, my mother's narrative might have prevailed. I would have been painted as dramatic, spoiled, unstable. The lesson is seared into me now. The truth must be spoken even when your voice shakes, especially then. To those watching, especially those who are older and carry their own long memories of families that silenced them, I say this: it is never too late to draw a line. I hear from women in their 50s and 60s who write that my story reminded them of their own youth, the times they were told to stay quiet, to hand everything to a golden child, to accept abuse because family is family. And I tell them what I had to learn in fire: you are allowed to walk away. You are allowed to protect what is yours. You are allowed to choose yourself. Sometimes I still stand on my balcony and imagine the girl I once was, 7 years old, soaked in rain, waiting for my mother to open the door. 14 years old, nursing bruises after a belt, begging myself to do better so it would not happen again. I want to reach into those memories, hold her hand, and whisper what I now know. You are not invisible. You are not less. One day you will stand in the light and the world will see you. I cannot change the past. The scars will never fade completely, but I have learned to carry them with pride. They remind me of who I was, who I survived, and who I became. They remind me that strength is not the absence of pain, but the decision to rise despite it. So here is the moral, plain and simple. Family is not defined by blood or obligation. Family is defined by the people who choose you, who protect you, who celebrate your existence instead of consuming it. My grandmother and Hannah are my family. The Dawsons never were. And to you listening to my story, perhaps with your own memories stirring, I ask, have you ever been asked to sacrifice everything for someone else's comfort? Have you ever been told that your worth was less because of who you were born to? If so, you understand. Type "I understand" in the comments if you have felt that weight. And if you have never been told this before, let me be the first: you matter. Your dignity matters. You are allowed to guard it with everything you have. I am Samantha Whitaker. I was locked in a basement by my own family. I was slapped in front of strangers. I was humiliated, but I refused to be erased. And in that refusal, I found my freedom. Tonight, I sit on the balcony of my condo, the same one they tried to tear from me, and I watch the Miami lights shimmer against the dark water. The city hums with life cars threading through glowing streets, music drifting faintly from open windows. For years, I thought I would only ever be a shadow in someone else's story. Now, bruised but unbroken, I know better. I am the author of my own life. When I chose to speak when I walked back into that ballroom, I thought I was standing alone. But I was not. Hannah stood beside me with her phone raised. Margaret walked in with her cane like a gavel of justice, and strangers across the world lifted their voices when mine shook. That is what saved me. That is why I am telling this story to you now. If you have ever been silenced by your own family, if you have ever been told that love means surrender, know this: you are not alone. There are more of us than you realize. Some are 19 like I was. Some are 50, 60, 70, carrying decades of scars. It does not matter when you choose yourself. What matters is that you do. I found healing in small steps, opening the balcony doors each morning, letting the ocean breeze remind me that the world is bigger than any one family's control. I found healing in my studies, in learning how to turn pain into understanding. I found healing in the shelter, where I tell other survivors the words I once needed to hear. But most of all, I found healing in the choice to stand, to say no, and to keep saying it until my voice rang louder than their cruelty. So I ask you, if this story touched something in you, share your own truth in the comments. Tell me where you are listening from. Tell me if you understand, because the more we speak, the less darkness wins. And if you want to hear more stories like mine, stories of survival, of betrayal, of finding strength in the ashes, then subscribe. It is free, and it means you will not miss the next voice that might sound a little like yours. They tried to bury me in a basement. Instead, I rose to the balcony. They tried to make me invisible. Instead, I became seen. My story is not just mine. It belongs to anyone who has ever felt trapped, anyone who has ever whispered in the dark, anyone who has ever wondered if choosing themselves was allowed. It is. And tonight I leave you with this question: will you choose yourself too?